The planet of Dracarys was unlike any other in the galaxy. Its sky shimmered with shades of purple and gold, and its landscape was dotted with towering mountains and deep valleys. Among these mountains lived the dragons, mighty ancient creatures with scales that glowed like precious gems. They were beings of immense power, wisdom, and grace, and they had ruled Dracarys for centuries. But there was one dragon that was unlike the others. Ziraza, an albino dragon, had long been a symbol of beauty and strength. Her white scales were as bright as freshly fallen snow, and her wings were vast, capable of soaring through the sky with the force of a storm. For centuries she had been the protector of the dragon kind, a living legend. Now Ziraza was dying. Her wings, once full of life, had grown heavy and frail. The fire in her breath, which had once been able to scorch entire forests, now flickered weakly. Her once immense strength had faded to the point where she could barely move. The magic that flowed through her veins, a magic ancient and powerful, was weakening. No one knew why, but all the healers and wise ones of Dracarys could only watch helplessly. Ziraza's daughter, Elisara, was beside herself with worry. As a young dragon, she had always admired her mother, seeing her as a figure of strength and wisdom. But now her mother was slipping away, and Elisara knew that time was running out. The healers had tried everything, but nothing seemed to work. They couldn't understand what had caused Ziraza's illness, and none of their magic could reverse the damage. There was one last option, one chance. An option that was both dangerous and untested. Elisara knew that the answer lay with a human. On Dracarys, humans were seen as little more than outcasts, strange and insignificant beings who had no place among the dragons. They were far less powerful than the dragons, and their technology was primitive compared to the ancient magic that the dragons wielded. But there was one human who had made a name for himself on the planet, a mechanic by the name of Jackson Cole. He was no wizard, no healer, but his knowledge of machines and his unique ability to repair and craft strange devices had earned him a certain respect from the dragons. It was said that Jackson could fix anything, no matter how broken it was. He had once repaired a broken-down ship that had crashed on Dracarys, using nothing but his hands and some scrap metal. That story had spread across the planet like wildfire. Even the dragons had heard of him. Though the dragons viewed humans with suspicion, they could not deny that Jackson's abilities were extraordinary. Elisara had to find him. She set out immediately, flying across the land, her powerful wings cutting through the air as she searched for the human. Her heart was heavy with worry, but her determination was stronger than ever. She would find Jackson no matter the cost. If there was even the slightest chance that he could help her mother, she would take it. After days of searching, Elisara finally found him. Jackson lived in a small, humble village on the edge of the Dragonlands, far from the towering cities where the dragons lived. His home was a modest cabin surrounded by tools, parts, and machines of all kinds. It was clear that Jackson spent his days working with his hands, fixing and crafting whatever he could. Elisara landed softly outside his cabin, her massive form casting a shadow over the small building. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how Jackson would react to her presence. Humans were often frightened of dragons, and she had no idea what kind of reception she would receive. But Jackson, hearing the sound of her landing, stepped out of his cabin without fear. He was a tall man with rugged features, his hands covered in grease and oil. His eyes were a calm blue, and when he looked up at the dragon, there was no fear in his gaze, only curiosity. "You're a dragon," Jackson said, his voice low but not shaken. "I am," Elisara replied, her voice strong but filled with urgency. "And I need your help. My mother, Ziraza, the albino dragon, she is dying." Jackson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "A dragon dying? I've never heard of such a thing." Elisara's wings fluttered with nervous energy. "No one has. The healers can't fix her. We've tried everything, but you're a mechanic, aren't you? You fix things. I've heard stories of your skills. Perhaps you can help her." Jackson stared at the young dragon, considering her words. He had never worked with dragons before, and he had never even heard of a dragon falling ill in such a way. But something in Elisara's eyes told him that she was serious. She wasn't here to waste his time, she was desperate. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could do something to help. "I'm no healer," Jackson said slowly. "I work with machines, not magic. But if there's a way I can help, I'll give it a shot. What exactly is wrong with your mother?" Elisara explained as best as she could. detailing how Zaraza's once strong wings had withered, her breath had faded, and how the magic within her seemed to be fading. The dragon healers had no answers, but Elisara had come to the conclusion that there must be a mechanical or technological solution, a way to repair whatever was broken inside her mother's body. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. It's going to be tricky. I don't know if anything I have will be useful, but I'm willing to try. Lead me to her. Elisara's heart lifted with hope. She had heard of Jackson's skills, but she hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. Perhaps there was a chance after all. With a sense of urgency, Elisara led Jackson to her mother's resting place, a quiet cave hidden deep in the mountains. There Zaraza lay still, her once glorious form now weak and frail. Her massive wings were spread out on the ground, her scales dull and lifeless. Jackson knelt beside her, studying her condition carefully. He had never seen anything like it. There were no visible wounds or injuries. Her body seemed to be failing from the inside, as though something vital had gone wrong. He stood up and turned to Elisara. This is going to take time, he said. I'll need to figure out what's going on inside her. I'll need tools, materials, and a lot of patience. But I'll do my best. Elisara nodded, relief flooding her. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Jackson might just be the key to saving her mother. And in that moment, she knew that this human mechanic might be their last chance. Jackson had never imagined that one day he would be standing in front of an ancient dragon, offering to help heal her. He had worked with machines all his life, fixing broken devices, repairing ships, and building tools from scrap metal. But dragons? Dragons were creatures of legend, beings of magic and power. Jackson's skills were rooted in the physical world of gears and metal, not the mystical forces that flowed through the veins of these majestic creatures. Yet here he was, standing beside Elisara, the young dragon who had brought him to her mother, Zaraza. The cave where Zaraza lay was cool and quiet. The flickering light from Jackson's small lantern cast long shadows on the walls. Zaraza's once vibrant white scales were now dull and cracked, and her wings, which had once been the envy of all dragons, were limp and barely moved. Her breath was shallow, and her eyes, though still filled with intelligence, were clouded with weakness. Jackson knelt beside her, inspecting the dragon's body carefully. He wasn't a healer, and he certainly wasn't a doctor, but he had a sharp eye and a mind that could figure out how things worked, even if they were alive. The issue wasn't something simple like a broken bone or a wound. No, this was something deeper, something internal. Whatever was causing Zaraza's illness was beyond the reach of regular medicine or magic. Elisara watched him closely, her large golden eyes filled with both hope and fear. She had no idea what Jackson could do to help, but she had seen his skills with machinery and she was willing to trust him. It had to work. Zaraza couldn't die, not like this, not without a chance to fight. I'll need to get a closer look, Jackson said, breaking the silence. He turned to Elisara. I'll need to study her body, figure out what's causing the problem. If there's anything mechanical or structural involved, I'll be able to find it. But I'll need some supplies. Elisara hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to leave her mother alone, but she understood that Jackson needed tools. I'll fetch what you need, she said softly. Stay with her. Jackson nodded, watching Elisara's massive form leave the cave with a powerful flap of her wings. As soon as she was gone, he turned his attention back to Zaraza. He could feel the weight of the task ahead of him. No one, not even the dragons, had been able to figure out what had happened to her. The dragon healers had tried their magic, but nothing had worked. Jackson knew he had no magic of his own, but he did have something else. His understanding of how things worked. That's what he had to rely on. He stood up, gathering his tools from the small bag he had brought with him. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the situation. He wasn't just working on a broken machine now. He was working to save a life that was far more precious than any machine he'd ever fixed. Jackson carefully examined Zaraza's wings first. He touched the edges of her wings, feeling for any signs of damage. There was nothing visible but the way they drooped, the lack of movement. It didn't make sense. He knew that dragons' wings were connected to their energy core, a powerful part of their being that allowed them to fly and to channel their magic. If her wings were failing, it meant something was wrong with that core. He moved to her chest next, pressing his hands gently against the scales. Zaraza's heart, if dragons even had hearts the way humans did, was beating slowly. Too slowly. The pulse was weak, uneven, but it wasn't her heart that concerned him. It was something deeper inside her, something he couldn't see. Something that didn't belong. Jackson pulled out a small device from his bag. It was a diagnostic tool, something he used when working with machines, but he had modified it to scan biological systems. It wasn't perfect, but it might give him a clearer idea of what was happening inside Zaraza. He placed the device on her chest, and it began to hum softly. The screen lit up with a series of readings, but none of them made sense to him. He frowned, studying the data. There was a strange fluctuation in her energy levels, something that shouldn't have been there. It was as if her body was rejecting its own magic, a kind of self-sabotage. But why? Before he could dwell too much on the mystery, he heard a soft rustling outside the cave. Elisera had returned, and she was carrying a bundle of supplies, a mix of materials that Jackson might be able to use. She had also brought several of the rare herbs that were known to help dragonkind in times of sickness. Jackson stood up as Elisera entered. "Thank you," he said, taking the supplies from her. He set them down on a flat rock nearby and began to sort through them. "This will help," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Elisera watched him work, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. She had seen humans do many things, but she had never seen one attempt something like this. Could a human truly help her mother? Could Jackson really fix what was broken inside Zaraza? "We have to save her," Elisera said, her voice full of emotion. "She's the heart of our kind. If we lose her, it will break us all." Jackson didn't look up as he worked, but he could hear the desperation in Elisera's voice. It pushed him forward, fueled his determination. He knew that Zaraza wasn't just any dragon. She was the protector of their people, a symbol of hope and strength. If he could fix her, if he could find a way to restore her, it might change everything. The dragons would have to see humans as more than just strange creatures. They might even learn to respect the way humans thought and worked. He focused all his energy on the task at hand. He connected wires to small mechanical components and began to work on a makeshift system that might help Zaraza's body regenerate. It was a long shot, and he had no idea if it would work, but he had to try. Hours passed in silence, with only the soft sounds of Jackson's tools and Elisera's quiet breathing filling the cave. At last, Jackson stood up, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He had finished the device. It was a strange combination of machinery and magic, something that had never been done before. But if it worked, it could stabilize Zaraza's internal systems, giving her body a chance to heal on its own. He turned to Elisera, who was still watching him closely. "It's ready," he said simply. Elisera stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Will it work?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "I don't know," Jackson replied honestly. "But we have to try." Elisera nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Together they moved toward Zaraza. It was time to see if Jackson's invention could bring her back from the brink. The cave was silent, save for the soft hiss of Jackson's breath as he carefully adjusted the last part of his mechanical device. The light from his lantern flickered gently, casting shadows across the rock walls, and the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. Zaraza, the mighty albino dragon, lay still on the cold stone floor. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, yet there was a spark of hope in the atmosphere, as if even she was waiting for what would happen next. Jackson stood above her, feeling the heavy responsibility on his shoulders. He had never worked on a creature like Zaraza before, and though he had built and fixed countless machines, this was different. This wasn't a piece of broken equipment, it was a living being, an ancient and revered creature, the lifeblood of her people. What he was attempting was something far beyond the realm of human knowledge and experience. Still, there was no turning back now. Is it ready?" Elisera asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence. She had been standing to the side, watching Jackson's every move, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. She knew that this device, this strange combination of metal and magic, was their only hope. If it failed, her mother, her strong, proud mother, might never wake again. Jackson nodded, though his face was tight with uncertainty. "I think so. It's the best I can do. The device should sync with her internal systems, stabilize her energy flow, and perhaps kickstart her magic again. But," he trailed off, his fingers hovering above the device, "there's no telling if it will work. We're venturing into unknown territory here." Elisera swallowed hard, but her gaze never wavered. She had seen too much to turn away now. Her mother, Zaraza, was the heart of the dragon kind, the protector of their land and their people. If they lost her, the entire race of dragons would fall into despair. The thought of losing Zaraza, her mentor, her guide, her mother, was unbearable. "I trust you," Elisera said, her voice firm. "You've already done more than I could have hoped for. I believe in this. In you." Jackson gave her a small nod, and with that the two of them approached Zaraza. The dragon's large body was still, her eyes closed as though she were in a deep sleep. Her once pristine white scales now appeared dull, faded from the illness that had gripped her. But her spirit, Elisera believed, was still strong. Zaraza was a creature of ancient magic, and even now, though her body was frail, her mind still retained its wisdom. "Here goes nothing," Jackson muttered under his breath. He placed the device gently against Zaraza's chest, near where her heart should be. The mechanism was small compared to Zaraza's massive body, but it was intricate. With a series of careful movements, Jackson activated the device and a soft hum filled the cave. The mechanical heart began to pulse with energy, its tiny lights blinking in rhythm with Zaraza's slow, weakened heartbeat. Elisera held her breath as the device began to glow faintly. For a moment, nothing happened. The cave was filled with the sound of silence, and both Jackson and Elisera watched Zaraza's chest, hoping for any sign of life. Then, a flicker, a tiny spark of energy passed through the device, traveling into Zaraza's body. Her wings twitched ever so slightly. Elisera's heart skipped a beat. "That's it," Jackson whispered, his eyes widening with hope. "It's working." The device continued to hum, sending waves of energy into Zaraza's body, syncing with her internal systems. The connection between the mechanical heart and the dragon's body grew stronger, and slowly, the faintest traces of life began to return. Zaraza's breathing steadied, and her chest rose and fell more evenly. Her wings, still weak, twitched again. Then again, Elisera gasped. "Mother?" Zaraza's eyes flickered open, revealing the golden irises that had once sparkled with wisdom. Her gaze met Elisera's, and for a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other. The bond between mother and daughter, the unspoken understanding, was clear. Zaraza was aware, even in her weakened state, that something extraordinary had happened. "Jackson, you did it," Elisera said, her voice thick with emotion. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to lose herself in the overwhelming relief she felt. Jackson stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Zaraza was still weak, her body fragile from the illness, but she was alive, and more importantly, she was recovering. The device had worked, but the process was far from complete. Zaraza's body needed time to adjust to the foreign mechanical heart. It would take days or perhaps even weeks for the integration to be complete. The device had stabilized her, but there was still a long road ahead. "I have to keep monitoring her," Jackson said, his voice calm but focused. "The device is working, but it's just one part of the puzzle. I need to make sure the energy flow stays steady, that her body isn't rejecting it. It might take a while for her to regain full strength." Elisera nodded, her gaze still fixed on her mother. "I understand. I'll stay with her. Whatever it takes, we'll help her heal." Jackson stepped back, glancing around the cave for a place to set up his tools and equipment. "I'll set up a station here. I'll need to check her every few hours to make sure the device is working properly and that her systems are adjusting. But there's hope now. That's the most important thing." For the first time in what felt like forever, Elisera felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. She had come to Jackson in desperation, knowing that if they didn't act quickly, her mother would slip away. But now, after everything Jackson had done, after seeing her mother's faint movements, she believed in the possibility of a future with Zaraza still standing tall and proud, guiding her people as she always had. As the hours passed, Jackson worked diligently, adjusting the device and making notes of the energy readings. Elisera sat beside her mother, keeping a watchful eye on her, her heart swelling with a mix of love, gratitude, and relief. Zaraza remained unconscious, but her breathing was steady, and the faintest hint of life returned to her face. By the time the sun began to set outside, casting a warm glow through the entrance of the cave, Zaraza's wings began to stir once more. She lifted them slightly, the movement slow but undeniable. It was the first sign of true progress. Elisera couldn't help but smile. Her mother was coming back, slowly but surely, and Jackson, this unlikely human mechanic, had done what no one else could. He had given Zaraza a second chance at life. The days passed slowly, each one filled with small signs of improvement. Zaraza's body, though still fragile, began to show more strength. Her breathing grew steadier, her wings fluttered with increasing regularity, and even her once lifeless scales began to regain their shine. But there was a long way to go. The mechanical heart designed by Jackson had stabilized Zaraza, but it was only the first step. The true test would come when she tried to move, when her magic and energy began to flow freely once again. Jackson worked tirelessly beside her, adjusting the device, taking readings, and monitoring every shift in the dragon's condition. Every few hours he would check on her, his mind focused and sharp. Despite the success so far, there was still a part of him that worried. Was it enough? Could a machine truly replace what had been lost inside her body? Or was it only delaying the inevitable? Elisera remained by her mother's side, her own determination never wavering. She had seen the signs of recovery, felt the warmth of hope growing, but her mother was still far from fully healed. It wasn't just the mechanical heart that was important, it was the spirit of Zaraza. Would the ancient dragon's magic return? Would her strength be restored? As each hour passed, Elisera found herself speaking to her mother, not expecting an answer but simply sharing her thoughts, her worries, and her hopes. She knew Zaraza could hear her. The bond between them was stronger than any illness or distance, and Elisera could feel her mother's presence in her heart, even in this weakened state. On the third day after the device had been implanted, Zaraza stirred again. This time there was more movement. Her massive wings shifted beneath her, lifting slightly from the cold stone floor. Elisera's heart skipped a beat. Was it happening? Was her mother really waking up? "Mother?" Elisera whispered, stepping closer to Zaraza's side. Zaraza's golden eyes opened, slow and steady, as if taking in the world around her once more. Her gaze locked with Elisera's, and the faintest hint of recognition flickered in her eyes. It wasn't the vibrant spark of the powerful dragon who had once ruled the skies, but it was something. It was a beginning, Elisera. Zaraza's voice was weak, raspy, but unmistakably hers. The deep, resonant voice of the dragon matriarch that had once commanded respect from all corners of Dracarys. "You are still here?" Elisera knelt beside her mother, her heart full of emotion. "Yes, mother. I'm here. You're going to be okay. Jackson has done it. He fixed you." Zaraza blinked slowly, as if processing the information. Her wings trembled as she lifted them slightly, testing the strength in her body. There was still a long way to go. Zaraza could feel the weakness in her limbs, the lack of power that had once been her defining trait. But she also felt something new, something unfamiliar, the pulse of energy from the mechanical heart inside her. It was strange, but not unpleasant. It was foreign, yes, but it was also what was keeping her alive. "Jackson," Zaraza said, her voice still soft, but filled with a hint of curiosity. "The Humyn, he helped me?" Elisera nodded. "He did more than that. He saved you, mother. Without him, I don't know where we'd be." Zaraza closed her eyes for a moment, reflecting on the gravity of the situation. It was difficult to grasp that it was a human, one of the very species that dragons had once looked down upon, who had given her a second chance at life. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Perhaps it was not magic that could heal her this time. Perhaps it was something else entirely, something that transcended the boundaries of species, something that had never been considered before. Jackson, standing quietly to the side, watched this moment unfold. His hands were still covered in the grease and oil from his work, but there was a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He knew that Zaraza wasn't out of the woods yet. She still had a long recovery ahead of her, but this, the moment when she spoke to her daughter, when her wings moved again, was a victory. It was proof that his work had mattered, that he had played a part in something much bigger than himself. Elisera noticed Jackson standing there, observing the reunion between mother and daughter. She turned to him, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know how to repay you for this. You've saved my mother's life. You've given us hope." Jackson smiled slightly, though there was a hint of unease in his eyes. "I didn't do it alone. It was all of us working together, and I'm not done yet. Zaraza's body needs time to adjust to the device, and her magic, her power, needs to come back. That will take time too. But this is good. This is progress." Zaraza shifted slightly. lifting her head from the stone floor and looking directly at Jackson. Her eyes, though still weakened, were filled with something that had not been there before. Respect. "Humyn," she said softly. "You have done what no one else could. I see now that we have much to learn from one another." Jackson's brow furrowed in surprise. He had not expected this acknowledgement from the mighty dragon, a creature who had once been a symbol of strength and magic beyond his understanding. But there it was, a moment of recognition, a small but powerful bridge being built between their two worlds. "I didn't do it for recognition," Jackson replied, his voice humble. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. I couldn't stand by and watch someone die when there was something I could do to help." Zaraza studied him for a long moment. And then, with slow, deliberate movements, she rose to her feet. Her massive form loomed over the two of them, but the power in her body was still lacking, her wings still weak from the illness. However, there was a spark of life in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "I owe you my life," Zaraza said, "and in return I will not forget this. Perhaps it is time for our two peoples to work together, not as enemies or strangers, but as allies." Elisera smiled, her heart full of hope. "That's what I've been hoping for all along." For the first time in days, the air around them felt lighter. There was still much work to be done. Zaraza's recovery was far from complete, and the road ahead would be long and uncertain. But for now, they had made it through the hardest part. Zaraza was alive, her body healing and her magic slowly returning. She would rise again, stronger than before, and with her, the possibility of a new beginning for both dragons and humans. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its warm glow across the cave, Elisera, Jackson, and Zaraza stood together, two different species united by a shared purpose. They didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The days following Zaraza's awakening were filled with progress, but the journey to full recovery was not easy. Though the mechanical heart Jackson had crafted was keeping her alive, Zaraza's magic was slow to return. Her wings, once powerful, enough to stir storms, could barely lift her off the ground. Her breath, which had once been able to melt stone, was still weak and uneven. But there was something else now, a spark of life, a glimmer of hope that had not been there before. Jackson continued his work tirelessly. He adjusted the device whenever necessary, ensuring it was functioning as it should. Every day he monitored Zaraza's progress, making tiny changes to help her body adjust to the foreign machinery. Despite the challenges, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his work had given her a second chance. He couldn't help but feel proud. Though he had never imagined himself as a hero, that was exactly what he had become in the eyes of the dragonkind. Elisera, too, remained by her mother's side, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and hope. The journey had been long and difficult, but it was now paying off. Each day she saw her mother grow a little stronger, a little more vibrant. Though there were still moments when Zaraza would fall into a quiet rest, her recovery was undeniable. Elisera knew that it was only a matter of time before her mother would be able to fly again, to regain her strength and her place as the heart of dragonkind. It was early one morning when the breakthrough came. Jackson had arrived at the cave before sunrise, as he did every day, to check on Zaraza's condition. He stood quietly, his gaze focused on the dragon matriarch. Zaraza was lying on her side, her wings spread out, her eyes closed. He had come to think of her as a patient more than a creature of legend, and in this quiet moment, as he observed her, he felt something shift in the air. "Elisera," Jackson called softly. Elisera, who had been sitting beside her mother, looked up from the scrolls she had been reading. She had been helping Jackson gather information on the dragon's ancient ways, trying to understand more about their magic and how it might interact with Jackson's mechanical device. When she heard his voice, she stood quickly and walked over to him. "What is it?" she asked. Jackson pointed to Zaraza, a look of quiet astonishment on his face. "Look, I think she's trying to move." Elisera rushed to her mother's side. At first she didn't see anything. Zaraza lay still, her wings resting on the ground, and for a moment, Elisera felt her heart sink. But then there it was, the smallest movement. Zaraza's massive wings shifted ever so slightly, then a little more, A ripple of energy seemed to pass through her body, and her wings began to flap, slow but steady. Elisara gasped. "Mother!" Zaraza's eyes fluttered open, and she turned her head toward her daughter. There was something in her gaze that had not been there before, something powerful, something ancient. It was the spark of the mighty dragon Zaraza had always been, and it was returning. "I feel it," Zaraza said, her voice stronger than before. "The power is coming back. Slowly, but it's there." Elisara couldn't contain her joy. "You're healing, Mother. You're really healing." Zaraza's wings flapped again, this time with more strength. She pushed herself up, her massive form rising from the stone floor with surprising ease. Her legs, though still weak, carried her as she stood tall. The mechanical heart inside her chest hummed with life, syncing perfectly with her body's natural rhythm. The magic that had once been a part of her very essence was beginning to return. "I am not fully restored," Zaraza said, her voice steady but still tinged with exhaustion. "But I feel it, Elisara. The magic is stirring inside me. It will take time, but I will fly again." Elisara's heart swelled with pride. "I knew you would. I never lost hope." Jackson watched the scene with quiet admiration. He had seen dragons in all their power, but to witness the return of Zaraza's strength was something extraordinary. There was no magic, no spell involved. This was a bond between man and dragon, a shared understanding that had created something greater than either could have achieved alone. Zaraza turned her golden gaze to Jackson, who had been watching in silence. "Humyn," she said, her voice low but filled with respect. "I do not know what to say. I was wrong to think that we could not learn from one another. You have done what we, the dragons, could not. You have given me back my life." Jackson nodded, a humble smile tugging at his lips. "I did what I could, but it was your strength, Zaraza, that made this possible. Without your will to fight, none of this would have worked." Zaraza's eyes softened. "Perhaps, but without you we would have had no chance. You have shown me that there is more to strength than magic or bloodlines. Perhaps one day our two peoples will find a way to work together, united, not as separate forces, but as allies." Elisara stepped forward, her heart full. "That is my hope, Mother. A world where dragons and humans live as partners, not as enemies. A world where we can learn from each other." Zaraza's eyes shone with pride. "Then we must make it happen. Together." The three of them stood there for a long moment, silent but united by a shared sense of purpose. There were still challenges ahead. Zaraza's full recovery would take time, and the road to reconciliation between dragons and humans was long. But for the first time there was a real possibility that such a future could exist. A future where cooperation between species was not just a dream, but a reality. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the landscape, Elisara, Jackson, and Zaraza knew that their work was far from done. There were many obstacles to overcome, many barriers to break. But they were no longer two separate worlds. They were no longer dragons and humans. They were something new, something stronger. Together, they could build a future where both could thrive. Zaraza spread her wings, feeling their strength return. The mechanical heart inside her hummed with energy, perfectly in sync with her magic. She took a deep breath and with a single powerful movement launched herself into the air. Her wings beat once, twice, and then she soared, her massive form cutting through the sky with grace and power. Elisara watched her mother rise, a proud smile on her face. Jackson stood beside her, his heart full of pride for the incredible journey they had all taken together. As the dragon soared above them, Elisara looked at Jackson and said, "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Jackson smiled. "Yes, the beginning of something new." And with that they turned toward the future, one filled with hope, cooperation, and the promise of a new dawn for both dragons and humans.